Richard and Elaine Foster were known as the perfect couple after 27 years of marriage. But when Elaine uncovered her husband's shocking secret, affairs with 37 men, just 3 hours later she was dead. Richard and Elaine Foster were the kind of couple people admired from a distance. They had been together since college, marrying young and growing up side by side into middle age. Their neighbors would often see them working in the garden on weekends or walking hand in hand down the street during summer evenings. From the outside, it appeared to be a marriage built on love, loyalty, and stability. Their 2 children were now grown, living their own lives, and the couple seemed to have gracefully entered that phase of life where it was just the 2 of them again. Friends at church often referred to them as the perfect pair, and their holiday gatherings, full of laughter and family traditions, only reinforced that image. Their home, a brick two-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood, radiated warmth with its carefully kept lawn and walls lined with family portraits that spanned nearly 3 decades of life together. Yet perfection has a way of hiding what lies beneath. Elaine, in her quiet moments, had started to feel something was off. It was never one thing she could point to, just small details that unsettled her. Richard had always been diligent about his work as an insurance broker, but over the past few years his hours seemed longer, his phone more guarded. There were stretches of time when he was unreachable, claiming client meetings or travel that never seemed to match his schedule. Elaine noticed, too, that his affection toward her had dimmed. The small gestures he once gave so freely, an arm around her shoulder, a kiss before leaving the house, a smile from across the room, had become rare. She told herself it was the natural course of a long marriage, that comfort sometimes replaced passion, and that maybe Richard was simply tired from years of providing for their family. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't fit. There were nights he didn't come home until past midnight, explaining it away with late meetings or traffic. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket or face down on the table. Whenever it buzzed, he would excuse himself to another room. Elaine's friends teased her that she was overthinking things, but late at night, lying in bed next to a husband who had become more like a stranger, she felt a weight she couldn't explain. Despite her doubts, Elaine carried on as though nothing was wrong. She cooked meals, attended church functions, and kept the household running as smoothly as always. She had built her identity around being a devoted wife and mother, and to admit that her marriage might not be what she believed felt unthinkable. She had given 27 years of her life to Richard, raising their children, supporting his career, and maintaining the image of a happy family. To consider that image a lie would mean questioning everything she had ever worked for. The outside world saw a couple who had it all, but Elaine lived with the quiet ache of unanswered questions. She hoped that time would resolve whatever distance had grown between them, that Richard would one day return to the man she married. But deep inside, her instincts told her the truth was far darker than she dared imagine. One quiet afternoon, Elaine decided to do some cleaning in the study. It wasn't unusual for her to tidy up Richard's workspace, but that day something felt different. The room had always been a mixture of order and chaos, papers stacked in neat piles alongside drawers stuffed with forgotten items. As she wiped down the desk and organized the bookshelves, her eyes caught a glimpse of something tucked at the very back of the bottom drawer. It was an old phone, dusty and hidden under a pile of folders. At first, she thought little of it. Richard often upgraded his devices, and this was probably just one he had discarded. Still, curiosity tugged at her. She turned it over in her hands and wondered why he hadn't simply thrown it away. With a strange sense of unease, Elaine pressed the power button. To her surprise, the screen lit up. The battery was still charged, and as it booted, she felt her heart begin to pound. She knew she shouldn't pry, but something inside her urged her to look. The phone unlocked easily, and what she saw made her entire body go cold. The gallery was filled with photographs she had never seen before, selfies of Richard with unfamiliar men, snapshots taken in hotel rooms, images that suggested a life she had no knowledge of. Her breath caught as she scrolled further, finding text threads and emails, each one a piece of a puzzle she never wanted to assemble. Dozens of names appeared in his contacts, accompanied by conversations that left little room for interpretation. The words were intimate, passionate, sometimes explicit, and they revealed a truth she had never imagined. Richard had been carrying on secret affairs for years, not with women, but with men. And Elaine scrolled, the scope of the betrayal grew clearer. It wasn't just one or two encounters, it was dozens. 37 names appeared again and again, each tied to messages, plans, and memories Richard had shared with him. He had bought gifts, arranged trips, and told lies to cover his tracks. The carefully crafted image of a faithful husband collapsed before her eyes. Elaine's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She set it on the desk and stepped back, her mind reeling. Every memory of the past 27 years suddenly seemed poisoned. The late nights, the distance in their marriage, the constant secrecy with his phone. It all made sense now. She thought of the times she had doubted herself, convincing herself she was paranoid or insecure. The truth had been there all along, carefully hidden in plain sight. The weight of betrayal crushed her chest. This was not simply infidelity, it was an entire double life. The man she thought she knew had been lying to her, living in shadows, building relationships with people she didn't even know existed. Her marriage, her family, her identity as a loyal wife, all of it felt shattered in that moment. She sat in study for what felt like hours, staring at the phone, unable to comprehend how her life had unraveled in the span of a few minutes. When she finally gathered the strength to close the drawer, Elaine knew she could no longer pretend everything was normal. The truth she had uncovered was too heavy to carry in silence. Something inside her had broken, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Elaine spent the rest of the day in a haze, her mind replaying the images and messages she had found on Richard's hidden phone. Each word she had read cut deeper than the last, and by evening she could no longer contain the storm raging inside her. She decided she would confront him that night, no matter the consequences. For 27 years, she had been the picture of patience and loyalty, but betrayal of this magnitude demanded truth. Richard arrived home just after sunset. His tie loosened, his expression calm, as if nothing in his world had shifted. He set down his briefcase and went about his routine, but Elaine's silence was different. Her eyes followed him with a weight that he seemed to notice immediately. She waited until he poured himself a drink before she retrieved the phone from where she had hidden it. She placed it firmly on the kitchen table, her hands steady though her heart pounded violently in her chest. When Richard saw it, the color drained from his face. He knew instantly what she had discovered, and for a long moment the room was wrapped in suffocating silence. Elaine told him everything she had seen, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. She listed the messages, the photos, the evidence of 37 affairs that spanned years of their marriage. She demanded answers, demanded to know how he could live a lie so complete while standing beside her in church pews, posing for family portraits, and building a life on vows he had clearly abandoned. Richard's composure began to unravel. At first, he tried to dismiss it, to claim she misunderstood, but Elaine had seen too much. His excuses only deepened her anger, and as she pressed further, his mask cracked. Instead of shame or remorse, there was coldness in his eyes. He warned her to leave it alone, his voice low and sharp. He spoke of reputation, of how the world would view him if his secret life were exposed. His words carried no trace of love. The woman who had stood beside him for nearly 3 decades, only fear for himself and the ruin of the image he had carefully constructed. The argument escalated quickly. Elaine, who had always been measured and gentle, felt fury rise like she had never known. Years of quiet sacrifice erupted in accusations and demands for honesty. Richard grew louder, more defensive, pacing the kitchen like a trapped animal. Neighbors across the street later reported hearing raised voices, dishes clattering, something heavy striking the floor. What they couldn't see was Elaine's face pale with fear as she realized the man standing before her was no longer the husband she thought she knew, but a stranger capable of anything. Shaken, she finally left the kitchen and retreated upstairs, locking herself in the bedroom. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed her closest friend. She barely got the words out, telling her she had discovered something horrifying and that she was afraid of Richard's reaction. Her voice broke as she tried to explain, but before she could finish, the call suddenly ended. Whether it was by accident or interruption, the friend couldn't be sure. Elaine sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the phone like a lifeline, her thoughts spiraling between despair and dread. She had confronted him, but in doing so, she had shattered the fragile illusion he depended on. And in that silence after the storm of words, she began to fear that uncovering the truth might come at a cost greater than she had ever imagined. The night grew heavier as hours passed inside the Foster house, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock in the hallway. Elaine remained upstairs, clutching her phone, staring at the unfinished message she had typed to her friend. Her instincts screamed at her to send it, to tell someone the full truth before it was too late, but her hands hesitated. She couldn't quite bring herself to expose Richard to the world, not yet, even after all he had done. For so many years she had been loyal to the image of their marriage, and even in this moment of fear, a small part of her clung to that role. Downstairs, Richard paced relentlessly, drink still in his hand. His mind raced, panic colliding with rage. The carefully constructed life he had protected for nearly 3 decades was now fragile, hanging by a thread that Elaine held in her trembling fingers. If she told their children, their friends, or their church community, everything would collapse. His career, his reputation, his place in society, all of it would be destroyed. The mask he had worn for so long had cracked, and the face behind it was desperate to keep control. At 10:30 p.m., Elaine finally left the bedroom and went downstairs. She found Richard sitting at the kitchen table, the hidden phone now between them. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark, his jaw clenched. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a quiet voice, she told him she couldn't keep his secret. She said the truth was too big, too poisonous, and she refused to live in silence any longer. Richard stared at her, and something in his gaze shifted, turning colder than she had ever seen. By 11:00 p.m., neighbors noticed lights flickering in the Foster home and heard muffled shouting. The argument had reignited, this time fiercer, sharper, like fire meeting gasoline. Elaine's voice cracked with pain, Richard's tone thundered with threats. A crash followed, something heavy thrown against a wall. A dog barked down the street, then silence returned, broken only by the occasional thud from inside the house. At 11:45 p.m., a call came through to emergency services. Richard's voice was frantic, reporting that his wife had fallen down the stairs. He claimed she wasn't breathing, that she needed help immediately. Paramedics rushed to the home within minutes, but the scene they entered told a story different from his words. Elaine's body lay at the bottom of the staircase, but the injuries she bore were not consistent with a simple fall. There were bruises on her arms, defensive wounds on her hands, and the angle of the trauma suggested something far more violent. As medics attempted resuscitation, one of them noticed Elaine's phone lying nearby on a small table. The screen was lit, displaying the unfinished message to her friend, "I can't believe what he's done. If something happens to me." The words trailed off, but the implication was chilling. Despite their efforts, Elaine was pronounced dead just after midnight. Richard sat in the living room as they worked, his face buried in his hands, repeating the same story again and again, that she had simply tripped, that it had been a terrible accident. Yet the scene told another story, one that investigators would unravel piece by piece in the days to come. The perfect marriage that once inspired admiration had ended in blood and suspicion, and the truth that had been hidden for 27 years had finally erupted into tragedy. The investigation into Elaine's death began before dawn. Detectives walked through the house carefully, documenting every detail, every stain, every mark that might tell the story Richard was trying to hide. Almost immediately, inconsistencies emerged. The staircase where Richard claimed his wife had fallen bore no signs of impact that could match the severity of her injuries. The spatter patterns on the wall suggested repeated blows, not a single slip. Elaine's body revealed bruising along her arms and wrists, the kind seen when someone tries to defend themselves. The medical examiner confirmed what investigators already suspected. Blunt force trauma, not a simple accident, had caused her death. As news spread through the neighborhood, disbelief followed. Friends from church, coworkers, and neighbors who had long admired the Fosters struggled to reconcile the image of the devoted husband with the whispers of murder. Few had seen the tension growing inside that house, and none could have imagined the secrets that Elaine had uncovered just hours before she died. Detectives, however, were relentless. They retrieved the hidden phone from the kitchen table, and with it, Richard's carefully guarded double life came tumbling into view. When confronted, Richard maintained his story. He told investigators Elaine had tripped after a heated argument and that he had nothing to do with her fall. But the evidence spoke louder than his words. The phone contained messages and photographs from 37 different men, relationships spanning years. Detectives pieced together a clear motive. Elaine had confronted him, threatened to expose the truth, and in his desperation to silence her, Richard had turned violent. During trial, the prosecution laid out the story in painstaking detail. Jurors listened as experts described the angle and force of Elaine's injuries. They saw photographs of the staircase, heard from neighbors who recalled hearing shouts and crashes that night, and listened to the chilling 911 call in which Richard's voice shook as he repeated a story that no longer held weight. The half-typed message on Elaine's phone became one of the most damning pieces of evidence, a final echo of her voice from beyond the grave. The defense tried to paint Richard as a man under immense pressure, someone whose private struggles had spiraled out of control. They argued that Elaine's death had been a tragic accident in the heat of an argument, not a deliberate act of murder. But the pattern of secrecy, the calculated deception spanning nearly 3 decades, and the overwhelming physical evidence left little room for doubt. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Richard was found guilty of murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, a punishment that stripped away the last remnants of the life he had so carefully built on lies. For those who had known Elaine, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it could not bring back the woman whose kindness and devotion had defined her life. Her death became a cautionary tale whispered in true crime circles, a haunting reminder of how secrets buried too long can erupt with devastating consequences. In the end, the story of Richard and Elaine Foster was not one of love and endurance, but of betrayal, violence, and the deadly cost of a truth finally revealed.